welcome to another edition of You and Me and Multiple Sclerosis. My name is Pam, and I've been living with multiple sclerosis for over 37 years. And of course, along the way, I've had to learn to do the kinds of things that need to get done in maybe a more creative way, because the old way wasn't really working for me anymore. And I published a video, I don't know, a week or two ago, finding joy in simple household tasks. It was surprising to me how satisfying those things turned out to be. But it was also surprising to me how many of you seemed to tune into that one. It was one of my more popular videos. So I thought, okay, well, last time I looked at meals and how I deal with those. This time I'll do one talking about how I handle paperwork. If you do any kind of searching on YouTube for something to do with paperwork, you're going to find that that is probably one of the most popular topics as far as homemaking goes, because it's a perennial challenge. You're never done. You just have to find a way that works for you and stick with it. And of course, in my quest to come up with a way to handle paperwork, a task that I took on because it bothered me a lot more than it bothered my husband, I went through a lot of trial and error. I found different filing cabinet types and I tried those. I tried a regular filing cabinet. I tried a lateral filing cabinet. I tried organizing things topically in binders. Lots of different things. But I finally maybe hit on something I've been using for some time now that seems to be working. So I'm going to stick with it. First of all, I have to say that in the old days, I didn't really care that much if paperwork kind of floated around or piled up here and there. I had other things going on. I worked outside the home and I had other hobbies and interests. So being around the house wasn't as big a part of my life as it is now. But I think also MS does kind of make you less tolerant of clutter. It just does. I've noticed that. So I really can't stand it when paperwork is here, there, and everywhere. I've had to get on top of it. And I want to just show you some of the things that I've been doing to get on top of my paperwork. Well, the first thing that you have to do is decide about every piece of paper. Do I keep this or do I get rid of it? And getting rid of it breaks down into several things. You can either throw it in the garbage, you can shred it, you can recycle it. And I look at these things in terms of mainly how private and personal they are. Anything that has personal information on it, if it's not easily torn off, then I shred it. So things like bank statements or anything like that, if I'm not keeping it anymore, I'm going to shred it. But catalogs and magazines, things that if you just rip off your mailing address, doesn't have any more personal identification on it, I recycle those. And I do quite a bit of recycling. So a lot of the papers that I bring in from the outside world end up in the recycle bucket. And then the other thing that ends up happening to some, I end up having to keep it. The way I handle the things I keep depends largely on who needs to be using it or who might need to use it in the future. So if something is just for me, for example, a lot of the cards I get, or maybe an article out of a magazine that I want to keep because I might refer to it or read it again or share it with somebody else, I'm not going to try and keep those things in a filing cabinet because it just gets to be too much for me. As a person with multiple sclerosis, my hands, they get tired and then the grip isn't as good as it needs to be. So I find that files, especially as they get heavier, just aren't working for me. And that was the same problem I was having with some of my other alternatives. So what I have been doing is scanning the things that I want to keep and just storing them on my computer. And that's been working really good because it's very searchable. And I've been able to keep quite a few things and get rid of an awful lot of paper. Much, much better. And of course, that needs to be backed up. You can't assume that your hard drive is going to remain unsullied by the virus world out there. So yeah, back up your system on a periodic basis. I have a system for doing that too. But if the people that are needing to use the paper are people other than me, so let's say something were to happen to me, my husband needs to be able to get at the papers and know where they are. And God forbid, if something happens to both of us, if we're both killed in a car wreck or something, our executor needs to be able to get a hold of our papers. So if it is something of lasting or legal value, I keep it in hard copy and I put it in a series of magazine holders, which is different, right? I don't know how many people use this method, but after much trial and error, I found that the magazine holders are really good for me. What I do is within the magazine holder, I use these folders in different colors. They're from Century Safe, and I'll link that down below. But in theory, you should be able to put your papers in here and ink won't stick to the plastic, etc. So I might, for example, if one of my files over there, one of my magazine holders, is for insurance. So I would have a folder like this for car insurance, and I would have a folder like this for, say, housing insurance. So that has worked really well for me. I have a folder on anything to do with our real estate, the house that we have, things that an executor might want to see that we actually have legal ownership of, or that we hold title to, that kind of thing. So they're quasi-legal papers. They're quasi-important. I wouldn't feel comfortable just having them electronically. I'd want to have a hard copy. But I really, really like limiting the hard copy that I have. I do, by the way, use a binder to keep my addresses in. And my method for the addresses is merely I take notebook paper, and on each page, I just up in the upper right-hand corner, I write the letter of the alphabet A through Z. And then as I get letters from people, if I want to save their mailing address, it's already written there, and they usually have a mailing label sticker. I will go ahead and just cut that out and tape it on the appropriate page. Yeah, I mean, it looks a little bit kludgy and messy. If you really like to be neat about things and you have decent handwriting, there are beautiful address books you can use. But for me, it works just great. Another type of thing that I keep, certain cards or other memorabilia that mean something to me that probably wouldn't mean anything to anyone else. So it's not something that I have to keep for my executor to look at. But I keep a memory box, basically. It's just a small plastic bin with a lid. As I find that I have certain paper things I want to save, I put them in the memory box. And that's worked really well. I just store that up on top of my bookshelf. And when I want to look at that stuff, I can take it down and look at it. But when I'm gone, it could all be thrown away or recycled. It doesn't really matter. But on the other extreme, I do also have some very important legal documents that are one of a kind and would not be available through any other means. For example, if you lose your bank statement, you can always call the bank, right? But the lawyer who did our last wills and testaments told us, here's your copies, but I do not retain the originals in my office. You now have the sum total of all the copies that there are. We went ahead and sent copies to our executor, but we also kept copies in a fireproof bag, and I'll link that below, the one that I purchased. And I'm keeping that in a place in the house. I've got it actually in the bathroom because, first of all, I don't think bathrooms tend to be a place where fires start. And also, since it's kind of in the center of the house, perhaps that would be a place that would survive, at least in part, if there were a fire. Those are the different ways that I deal with different kinds of paper. There is one last category of paper that would be maybe considered a temporary hold. I will ultimately disposition this paper some way or other. It's either going to be scanned or shredded or recycled, or possibly given to somebody else, maybe passed on down the line. But for right now, it's either something I want to read or something that I might use for some other purpose, but I haven't really decided yet. So as you can see here, I have this little desktop station that allows me to corral all that kind of stuff along with all the things I need to do to mail things. So I've got stamps and tape and pens and mailing labels and all the stuff that I would need. And I've got two slots there. The top slot is the action slot, where if I have bills that need to be paid or cards that I need to send, etc., that's where I would put that. And as you can see, I've got that empty right now. So I'm pretty proud of myself for that. The bottom one is all that stuff that I was telling you about, the temporary hold. And as you can see, it's getting a little bit out of control there. There's too much stuff in there. So I'm going to have to make myself a little project to just go through that paper. Maybe time has passed and I no longer am interested in it and I can just get rid of it. But maybe there's something in there that I should be doing something with. I've got to make up my mind. And then there's one last category, and that is paperwork that belongs to someone else besides me. And in our house, that's just my husband, because we don't have anyone else living here. But my husband and I do not have exactly the same idea about how to keep a tidy home, or what constitutes clutter, or how best to manage paperwork. And he doesn't have a study of his own in the house, so he does tend to leave his working papers here, there, and everywhere. So what I did was purchase a basket that I put on the sofa, since his main place to work is in the living room. I put it on the sofa and I put all the papers that were scattered around the room into the basket. He agreed that this would be the way we would do things from now on. So as I find pieces of paper scattered around the room or the house that I think belong in the tray, I go ahead and just put them there. And periodically he does go through and decide what he wants to do with those different pieces of paper. He has other ways of keeping paper besides me that work for him. But this works for me because the tray itself, if we're having company, I can just pick up the tray and put it somewhere else so that the sofa is available for company to sit. Now let's just talk briefly about things that come into the home, because any system is only as good as the habits that I have for dealing with things that come into my home in the first place. The biggest one is the mail. And we now have a habit where when the mail comes in, my husband is usually the one that goes out to the mailbox and brings it in, although I sometimes do. But either way, we put it on the corner of my desk, and every single evening I sit down with a letter opener, I open all the mail, I go through all the catalogs and the magazines, I separate them into piles, mine or his. I make sure he gets his, he does what he wants to with his. And then I take mine and I decide based on that list that we talked about earlier. Is it something I'm going to keep? Is it something I need to pay? Does it need to go in my action file? Is it something that I'm going to recycle? Etc. And I take care of it right then and there. If it's a catalog that I'm not interested in, then I tear my name and address off of it and I put it in the recycle box. If it's something I might want to read later, we actually have a little hanging rack in the bathroom, convenient to where you might have some time to read. And that's where we look at magazines and catalogs. And that way I can go through that periodically when that starts to get too full, when things are too tight, that's my signal to go in and clean it out. Sometimes I bring home things from church or from some other event that we attend. And if it's worth keeping, I might scan it. Otherwise, it's going to go in the recycle bin. And on that note, I've just learned, by the way, that the best way to deal with that kind of stuff is not to bring it home in the first place. So I'm pretty judicious now about the paper that I pick up. Used to be you'd go into the gas station or whatever and they'd have those little trifolds about different tourist attractions and whatever, and I would pick those up. All kinds of things. I might save menus from restaurants we'd gone to, but I just don't do that very often anymore. Most of that kind of thing is available online anyway, and much more up to date. Thank you, Internet. It's helped me in many ways. So that's kind of it. I just try really hard not to bring things in the first place. All of these routines have really helped me turn managing my paperwork into a habit and not something that I have to make decisions about and think about every single time. Because I don't have a lot of extra energy or motivation to do that. But when something's a habit, it bothers me more when I don't do it than when I do it. Another thing that I do is keep all our recipes in a binder so that it's easy to get if we need a certain recipe and we know we've made it before. There it is. And when we have made it and we do like it, we also put little stickers on there just so that we know, oh yeah, this must be the one because here's the sticker of the cat or whatever. I have many recipes that I just have in electronic form only, and they're nice and searchable that way. But when I actually print one out so that my husband can make it, and we end up liking it, we put it in that notebook, and that's been a lot easier for us to deal with than just wondering, where in the world is that recipe? What book was that in anyway? We don't remember. Now what do we do? We're really not doing that much anymore. And I really should say just a word about taxes. That's an important thing, of course. But and keeping the tax forms, I know that you're only supposed to keep them for 7 years, but we do have some going back further than that. Just the return form itself, though. None of the W-2s or W-4s or the charitable contributions. We get rid of all of that. As it turns out, you don't need to attach all that stuff to the return. I just make a table that shows all of the charitable contributions and what the totals are. And that seems to work fine for our accountant. And no one's ever said anything different about it. So that's the method I'm just going to continue to use. And that really does keep the paperwork for taxes down to a minimum. Well, that's it. I think that's pretty much an overview of how I handle paperwork. Again, I'm not saying that this is the final way I'm going to do it for the rest of my life, or that there aren't other ideas that others of you have, because your needs are different and your life is different. So you might have come up with a different way of handling paperwork, in which case I'd love to hear it. So leave me a comment and let me know. Is any of this helpful for you? I sure hope so. And at the very least, I hope it was interesting. Well, that's all for today. So take very good care of yourself, and I will see you again in my next video.